Hello, I'm Mika Panda Ghost Story. Please like and click the follow bell button so you don't miss my videos. Thank you. It happened on the night that I was the designated driver among my group of friends after a part of me friends were Michael, Eddie and Daniela. We live in the country, so anytime we wanted to go to the bars or parties he'd have to travel long distances. That's why it's such a big deal for one of us to be sober enough to drive. We were driving down the 513, which is an unlit highway littered with the occasional house or two, but mostly forest. The road leads to town, where most of the bars of this story takes place. On the way back from town, Daniela started to cry that she had to piss really bad. I told her she'd have to wait a while longer, but not gonna lie, I started to get the urge as well. That mixed with the fact that Daniela was now screaming in her drunken fit, I figured why not pull over to the side of the road and just piss somewhere in the woods. Daniela got out first and disappeared into the crops on one side. I went to the opposite side of their road and slightly into the woods just because I'm the type of person who can't have people watching me piss. I finished first and got back in the car. Eddie and Michael were singing to the roaring rad music playing on the radio while I pretty much just sat there in silence, growing impatient. My two drunk friends didn't seem to find anything strange about the fact that Danielle had now been gone for 5 minutes, so I got back out to call her name. Cole has a much stronger voice than I, so when he screamed for her, it would be impossible for her not to hear, but still she didn't call back. I didn't want to go in those crops, but I kinda felt like I had to since she's my friend and I was the most aware at that moment. I forced Michael to come with, since I was afraid to go in alone. Eddie stayed in the car. He was just too far gone at this point. With the flashlight from my glove box, Michael and he pushed our way through the thick overgrown crops, walking in the only direction we could think to go straight away from the car. Michael was calling Danielle's name while laughing his ass off. I can understand why he was finding it funny in his condition, but I just wanted to make sure she was all right and get home. Over the sounds of her own footsteps brushing crops aside and Michael's laughter, I heard something else in the near vicinity. I put my arm out to Michael's chest to halt him. Now all that could be heard was the night breeze blowing through the crops. What is it like? I whispered, to which I responded that Michael called out Daniela, his name again. I joined in, figuring it was just her trying to sneak up on us and scare us. And again the footsteps stopped, so we walked a little deeper into the crops. That's when we came to a narrow clearing stretch. I don't know much about crops and farming or anything, but it seemed to be some little stretch for people to walk through. It was probably the width of 2 people, just enough to walk through. I looked to my left as far down as light would let me see, and then to right he could hear 3 footsteps, and then a couple crops pushed outward into the opening as somebody stepped into view. At first my light was only revealing their legs, so by default onto the circumstances I assumed it was Michael. However, the light revealed it to be not Michael, but instead some random man who I'd never seen before. His facial features weren't clear enough to give a good description, but he didn't look friendly. I ran for it back in the only direction I remembered coming from. I guess I ran so fast that it only took me about 10 seconds to make it back to the car. ID, he was passed out in the car at this point, so I didn't bother trying to get help from him. Was honking their horns again, Michael's and hopefully Daniela's attention. The sight of that man just disturbed me. I didn't know if he owned this land or not. I continued to land the horn until finally Michael came out of the crops dragging Daniela, who seemed to be out cold. I got out to help him lift her back inside of the car and plop her on the seat. Michael pointed out the gash on her forehead as if she had been struck with a heavy sharp object. Michael seemed to be sobering up pretty quickly due to the situation, he advised. I drive to the nearest hospital, which was 10 minutes away. The drive there was not fun. It was full of panic and yelling. We brought Danielle in to have her wound treated as soon as possible. It was only then that Michael explains to the nurses, not me, that he saw some guy dragging her collapsed unconscious body before fleeing deeper into the crops. After noticing him, he never mentioned that in the car, but it made perfect sense now. That man in the crops with us that night did this. Daniela was awake, but she got all stitched up, and she had no recollection of the entire night from the moment we stepped into the party to the moment she got struck in the head. Hello, Amika Panda Ghost Story. Please like and click the follow bell button so you don't miss my videos. Thank you. 3 Scary True Highway Horror Stories, Part 2. 12:17 according to the green clock, shining bright for my car's dashboard. I still remember that number as I was driving home from the night shift of the pharmacy I worked at, taking the highway. At this hour is a little dangerous since there's no lights, usually no other cars at that hour, and commonly deer would walk out onto the road and you wouldn't notice them until it'd be too late if they were in your direct path. That's why I always drive slow on it 50 max as the road curved to the left. A clear row of reflective lights appeared in the horizon, which I quickly realized was their reflective tape of a row of traffic cones as well as a flashing blue light in the distance in front of them seemed to be the reflective material on a safety vest. I was so confused trying to figure out what the hell this was about that it didn't even hit me that I should be slamming on the brakes until it was almost too late. The car came to a halting stop as the hard screeching of the tire stopped and the man wearing the reflective vest started walking over to my car, arms out waving. I guess he was tailing to move the car. As the man got closer, I could see what appeared to be a police uniform under the vest. He knocked on my window with the joint of his pointer finger, so I took that as lower your window. I rolled down the window, better revealing the man's face to give you a good description. He was black, about -1 foot, skinny, slight stubble, and the left earring. He was kind of young. I'd have to guess around 25. He spoke in a very low, non-commanding voice, especially for an officer. He said, "License and registration, please." I paused for a second and asked if I did something wrong because I definitely wasn't speeding. He paused as well and looked slightly to the left and then back at me. "Sir, this is a sobriety checkpoint," he said in once again a very non-commanding voice. I asked why he would need my ID and registration, then if I had not yet been suspected of anything. He leaned back from my car and asked me to step out of a vehicle to begin the test. I opened my door and stepped out. Immediately I noticed the cop towered over me. He took a roll of tape out from his vest pocket and leaned it down onto the ground, stretching it to a length of about 15 feet. He told me to step on the end of the roll of tape and place my arms out to my sides as I walked across the tape in a straight line. I easily did it with no issues, with the cop directly behind me the whole time and comfortably close. When I got to the end of the roll of tape, I could more easily see that blue flashing light. It wasn't sitting on top of a police car, it was sitting on some older small sedan. I looked back at him and asked to see his badge. He just looked at me with the blankest stare. It started to sink in, and I literally meant it, because I felt like my heart was sinking. This guy wasn't a cop. He said something next that I couldn't quite distinguish at first, but as he got to his car, I assumed he said, "I'll go get it in second." He was bent over into his car, grabbing something. While he was distracted, I ran back to the car. He looked at me as I started the car and raised a gun up to me. It goes without saying I put the pedal to the floor. Asked car jumped into an acceleration throw the traffic cones. I saw the headlights of the guy's car go on as I was a few hundred feet away. But at that point I was already going over 60 and there was no way he'd be catching me. I got off at the next exit, and as soon as there were street lights around, it turned off my car lights to draw less attention as I finished the drive to my house. I only wish I had a dash cam at time so I could have gotten it on video. I swear it would have wound up on the news. Hello, I'm Mika Panda Ghost Story. Please like and click the follow bell button so you don't miss my videos. Thank you. 3 Scary True Highway Horror Stories, Part 3. I was taking a drive from Maine to Upper New York to spend the week with family. I left right after work around 5:30, so I didn't anticipate getting there, and so past 1 o'clock in the morning. I had the Tablato, my Jeep Wrangler, off so I could enjoy the hot weather. I was somewhere in Vermont well past midnight when the gas light flicked on and the car started beeping. Unfortunately, the gas gauge in the car was broken, so there was no way to gauge how much gas was left. I was told by my brother, who drove the car the previous day, that he filled it up to the top, but clearly he was either mistaken or lying, because I had not used anywhere near a full tank's worth of gas. One off hose, blue service sign zoom past. I could see a gas station symbol in one of the boxes, so I turned off that exit onto a desolate road, which surely led to some kind of civilization I wouldn't be finding out anytime soon. However, because the car started jittering and bumping around a bit, making weird noises that didn't sound good at all. A few seconds later, the acceleration stopped and the car came to a helpless halt. I couldn't believe it, but I actually ran out of gas. I hopped out of the car and got on the phone with AAA, telling them my exact location. They said they could have a guy out to me in at least 20 minutes. I was grateful, but at the same time annoyed that I'd be waiting now for at least 20 minutes for about 15 minutes. I could have just strolled around my car slowly, looking down at my phone, texting friends about the situation and checking social medias. It was so quiet, no sounds of distant traffic, no passing cars, just sound of crickets and other night creatures in the woods. Then I heard something walking around in the woods. The footsteps were decently heavy, so I had a hunch it was a deer or something, but the possibility of it being a bear wasn't far-fetched given that this was bear country. I walked around to the passenger side of the car, now where the woods were and where the sounds were coming from, just in hopes of seeing a deer or some other harmless animal. Then there were clapping sounds, like it actually sounded like a person clapping their hands. I moved a little closer to listen for it again. This time it was 3 claps. I called out to the woods, hoping in some weird way that someone wouldn't swear, but after I did, the clapping didn't happen anymore. I just stood there waiting for something to happen, but it was just silence. So I got back in the car and just waited. I heard footsteps once again coming from the woods, coming in my direction. Then it just stopped. I looked outside and saw the head peeking from behind a tree, and just ahead it almost looked lifeless. The eyes, they just looked so lifeless I couldn't even tell if they were looking at me or not. I was so focused on these details I didn't even think to scream at the horror of what I was witnessing. I cranked the windows up on both sides and turned off headlights. However, hiding in the car didn't make me feel much safer, since the entire top was off. Without their headlights on, there was complete darkness. I couldn't see 2 inches in front of me, yet I was surrounded by the night noises of the forest. I was ducking down below the dashboard, doors locked, yet still completely exposed to the outside, praying not to hear any sudden sounds like footsteps. I felt the sinking feeling in my stomach. However, as I heard someone grab the car Door handle. I tried my best not to move or make any noise. I was waiting for something to start pounding at the glass, or at the very least reach around the opening behind the front door to just unlock it. I was so exposed, it wasn't even funny, and then I felt a hand aggressively grabbed onto my back. I simply lost it and screamed at the top of my lungs, but suddenly the hand released its grip on my shirt as light began to fill the area, and the sound of a truck engine pulling up the road was music to my ears. I sat up and turned around to see the headlights of a truck, but whoever was grabbing me was long gone. Already I ran outside to greet the man who stepped out. He was a big dude in his 40s. I basically cried to him about what just happened, taking huge breaths in between each sentence. Something about his personality and presence was just calming and reassuring. However, he filled my car up with gas, and we both went on our ways, even though something about that man's aura just calmed me down. The memory of what happened that night is still haunting, and the image of that lifeless head peering around that tree eyes imprinted in my brain.
I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor, Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police. It was on the news. It was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it and realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned you. Invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent. Fast F.O. was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get in my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was digging out a really big hole in the ground, he seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, "No, it's okay." Because of his bizarre reaction, he told me, "I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard," and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses, as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. Then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear. Now, when he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and there was a good thing I did, because he came back outside seconds later. But He wasn't digging, in fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife the next day. The first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation. Call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. Coincidence happened to look out my window across the Charlie's house and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. Hello, I'm Mika Panda Ghost Story. Please like and click the follow bell button so you don't miss my videos. Thank you. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family at my current house. By myself, we lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15. Within the last few months of my family living in that house, I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives. As bizarre as that is, though, we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, were outside playing basketball on the driveway. That was when one of the 2 boys next door, it's hot, came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. Don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road. The next day I agreed, since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said yeah and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times. Because of it, we got to the woods, haven't spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids. A few words, maybe, why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it that's funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric read the loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in the mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stops firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the 2 boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. Always had a feeling these 2 were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard to press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and somebody behind me going shh. Somehow I didn't scream or jump, I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, okay. He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1:00 a.m. Opened my window and saw a Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and feeling like I was about to die, I'd over the ground only to hear the two boys crack up and laughter. I heard one of them referred to me as A. There were two other instances that week where the two would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to move and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me or my brother told anybody about the boys or their threats. All I know is those two boys were troubled, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. Hello, I'm Mika Panda Ghost Story. Please like and click the follow bell button so you don't miss my videos. Thank you. At the time I'm writing this happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a price. I'm living in a really shitty area, the only place I can afford a house, so I'm not bound to have the ideal neighbors. The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's two people living next door, one woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the two. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freak out episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress. This went on for about an hour, and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down. In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then the younger woman entered the living room screaming, "How dare you!" Repeatedly, the older woman held her back from approaching me and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat. However, I realized they had finally gone silent. Next door, I was able to get some sleep at last. Well, I woke up feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 o'clock in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds and I went back to bed, I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes and test. Since I'd fallen back asleep, I didn't know what could have woken me up though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black objects would be the face of the deranged woman from next door. She screamed like the lunatic she loved. She screamed as if she were a vampire. In the light I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me, and I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying but dangerous as well.